Workbench. And today I would like to share with you what we have jointly developed here and what the idea of the Transition Workbench is, and also how can you benefit from it in your existing projects. So maybe let's start with the overview slide. As you know, this is part of a series which we are doing together with the Indus community. And today we are in the point 3 around streamlined cloud transition. But of course, you can access all the other sessions to get the full picture of the entire storyline. With that in mind, let's have a little bit of a look. We assume that you already have an idea what is the approach which you are interested in, so how the systems will be migrated. You already know your target, which is in the private cloud, and we are at the step basically where you would like to now migrate your systems. So let's see, what do we have to offer? So if you look at the entire private cloud customer journey, this is a slide I have borrowed from our project lead community. You can see that the System Transition Workbench is something which exists to support you as part of the migration phase. We will not be here as part of the preparation and deployment, so a project has many steps and activities into it. But at the point in time where the landscapes are handed over to customers, the System Transition Workbench is part of that landscape. So this is a free offering that comes part of your kind of RISE customer contract, and in the customer landscape, the Transition Workbench is. This is an orchestration layer which exists to support you during the migration phase. As you can see, we start with the migration preparation and the migration execution based on the approaches which you would select. Important thing is, of course, we are not rewriting any of the procedures, so we will be still talking about the same SUM, SWPM executions. We go in details a little bit further. Important thing to note here, we have a little bit of an overlap. This is also slightly forward-looking in its nature. The idea being that the goal of the Transition Workbench is that the procedures which you are very familiar with will now become very tailored towards what the private cloud offering is and what ECS's expectation towards systems is. So with that in mind, here we are supporting you with the preparation for the system handover, and we are simplifying the entire post-processing. But let's go into a bit more details how this works. The important things to note. So the System Transition Workbench is something which you can use for any sort of ABAP-based system. We currently don't support non-ABAP systems, and then we don't have any database limitation, which means that you can talk about lift and shift scenarios as well as conversion and change scenarios. As we said, this is not changing the core of the procedures. So if we're talking about a conversion, you will still have your SUM run. If we're talking about the lift and shift, you would still be using, for example, native HANA functionality, and so on and so on. One of the main things around the Transition Workbench is that we offer you a lot of orchestration and preparation of the activities which you need to execute for the migration. So there is 3 levels of preparation and prerequisites that are being checked already at the start of a project. The one thing that we start with is the input collection. So you have multiple inputs which come both from the source and the target system, and all of these inputs need to be collected and validated. So usually you have the source system side coming from the customer, which could be manually collected, and the target side coming from ECS, which could also be manually collected. And in those cases, what would happen is that potentially you're missing a password, you potentially are missing an instance number, or something is wrong into the entire configuration which you have been provided with. In those cases, of course, this is delaying the entire project. So the first thing the Transition Workbench does is it collects all the required inputs for the approaches and validates that everything is correct. Then we move into the first report, which we will see in a few minutes into the demo, and that is the technical readiness and preparation of the system. The technical readiness is just validating the minimum requirement in the technical prerequisites for this migration approach to be executable. So if we're talking about conversion, we're looking at the mount points, we are looking at the connectivity, we are looking at the ports. If we're talking about something like the lift and shift, we are looking at, for example, the HANA plugins, the HRDR setup, we are looking at the keystroke configuration. Depending on the approach, you have targeted validation. And then the final third pillar of the prerequisites is the so-called other player prerequisite checks. And there we are validating the state of the system, the state of the different queues, for example, transport queues, inbound, outbound, RFC queues. We can look also into the versioning of SPAM STPI, all things which have some interest or relevance to ECS and to the handover. So for example, as the point of handover, you would usually use all of the kind of queue establishes. You have to provide some exceptions maybe. You have to provide some statements. This will be clean, this will be not. Please accept the system like this and so. So there is some discussion to be done. And in the case of, for example, in a SPAM STPI, especially if you're having a lift and shift scenario, a SPAM update is not always naturally part of the scenario. However, at the point of post-processing, if your SPAM version is outdated, of course, this will now be upgraded as part of the post-processing procedure. And this just increases the downtime of the entire operation. So things like this, we can put into those prerequisite checks and reports and just ensure that everything goes a bit smoother. Then, based on these health and quality checks, what we already have is an agreement with our ECS colleagues that the standard post-processing downtime is now reduced after handover. So instead of 14.5 hours, you would get down to 10 hours as a reduction of the downtime. This, of course, comes at the, so to say, price of standardization. And what do we mean with the price of standardization? And of course, it's not the final reduction. We will continue reducing this. In order to offer this, the agreement which we have is that the handover and post-processing will always look the same way and will always start the same way. And what this means is that as part of the private cloud environment, we are always utilizing this unmanaged migration server, which is provided temporarily for the purposes of the migration. On that server, the System Transition Workbench is pre-installed, pre-configured, pre-started, so comes free of charge with the migration server. And this is where we orchestrate the entire process from. We will set up, for example, here the source system side. We will do the connectivity onto source and target via RFCs and SQL. So like a user, we will check the systems, we will orchestrate the procedure. Importantly, even in the lift and shift case, you will still have this migration server and we will install a temporary ABAP system on this server. Now, this temporary system is connected to the target HANA database and all the post-processing or finalization activities are done in combination with this temporary system before the handover. The idea being, of course, that especially as a partner, you still have full control and OS access at this level. So in case anything is going wrong, you can correct everything with the usage of this temporary application server. Now, the beginning of the handover always looks the same, and it starts with the switch of this temporary application server to the target one, final validation of the target, and then we move on into the handover to ECS. And then, as you can imagine, this means that as part of these switch and validation procedures, we can put standard activities which are relevant to the entire post-processing. And as a result of that, we get the post-processing downtime reduction. So keep in mind, there will always be this migration server where the transition workbench works, but we have tried here to make it as simple as possible and optimized as possible. Then let's look a little bit into the supported scenarios. So As we said, we are focused on ABAP-based systems with no limitation. It could be a BW, a CAR system, a GTC, so on and so on. And then into the different fields of approaches, we have different levels of automation. So if you look at the selective data transition, there isn't a native cockpit which will orchestrate the entire selective data transition. We have talked a lot into this series about the BTC and how to do this. And one of the requirements for selective data transition is that there is a shell system which is created at the beginning of the project. Now, the transition workbench can be used to kind of create and convert and move this shell system directly into private cloud if you're performing the selective data transition from on-premise with a target into private cloud. Alternatively, if you're doing something like selective data transition on-premise and then lift and shifting the result, again, you can use the transition workbench for the resulting system. That is about that. Now, on the conversion space, we have a little bit more or less into the conversion space. So what we do importantly here is we orchestrate things on top of Zoom. So think of it like an onion. There is a little bit of activities before and a little bit of activities after, but the core of the system conversion stays the Zoom run. So in the case of conversions, there's two approaches which we basically differentiate. One is the D-move to S4, the other is the DMO with system move. The D-move to S4 is basically the kind of downtime optimized solution, which also contains the DO, DMO, and DOC options. We don't do anything specific for DOC. As you can see or will see, we are a singular system run tool, which means also the knowledge sharing you have cross cycles is something you need to manage separately. But there we will prepare a lot of things. So again, we do our pre-checks. We will prepare and start Zoom for you and then help you with the handover activities. DMO with system move is a fallback to the D-move to S4, and importantly, there are two distinct cockpits. One is the DMO with system move when we're talking about conversions, and if you would like to use the DMO with system move for the so-called lift and shift with database change, where you do not update the application server or upgrade the application server, but only to the database change, that is a different option. So be mindful when you use the options. And then finally, lift and shift. Lift and shift is, of course, the, so to say, simplest from complexity of these approaches, which means it is more easy to automate. So that one is one of our most automated procedures into the portfolio. There we have the HANA 10 copy where we do a lot of the activities for you. So we can configure the database, we can set up replication automatically, finalize it, check the system status and so on. As a fallback to that is the backup and recovery. And the more interesting approach, which I focus a little bit more on today, is update and copy. What is update and copy? So update and copy is a relatively new approach. It combines an in-place Zoom update together with a HANA tenant copy. The idea here being that this is an alternative to Zoom DMO that can be more beneficial in certain cases. So it's important here to keep in mind it's not a cure-all solution. However, you might be in the situation where you have an existing S/4HANA system, for example, with very large tables like AC Docker or Mat Docker are already in the millions of records. In that case, the standard Zoom DMO might be struggling with the kind of export-import since it's one very large table. For those cases, you can use the update and copy, and that might offer a downtime optimization. In one customer case, this was reported to be about 8 to 10 hours of downtime reduction from the approach, because in this approach, we use the tenant copy for the move from point A to point B, and the Zoom is doing the in-place upgrade. Now, this also means that since we are not in the D-move to S4 space, if you have non-S4 ABAP systems, for example, such a GTC or BW system, this also offers some downtime optimization approaches for those kinds of systems in comparison to standard Zoom DMO. Now, importantly, here, what we have to keep in mind as downside to this approach is, of course, that we are working directly on the source system. So you have to be a little bit more careful and mindful when safeguarding this, as the upgrade in the end is an in-place one. But let's see a little bit of a mapping how things would look like. We will also see a demo on the exact approach, and just let's start from the beginning. So we assume we have like an existing S4 system, let's say 2020, and we have a target into private cloud, which is 2023. It could also be 2025. At the beginning of the project, as part of the private cloud environment, you will get this migration server we mentioned, and on this migration server, the System Transition Workbench will be pre-installed and pre-configured. From that point, what we will do is we do the validation on the source and target side. So we will not set up the network, but we will verify that we can connect. We will configure the database. We install here a temporary application server, and we will start the replication directly from source to target. So this is a standard tenant copy replication, similar to lift and shift. Now, where the changes come is that we, in addition to that, here we'll download a SUM you can bring to the source system, and then you start SUM onto the source and you perform an in-place upgrade. Now, while SUM is making the changes as a result of the upgrade, the tenant copy is actively replicating all of these changes onto the target. This also means that here for the in-place SUM run, you can choose downtime optimized upgrade strategies like NZTM, for example, which means you can further bring down the downtime, because at the end of the day, for this approach, the downtime is the combination of the SUM downtime with the finalization of the replication. But let's not rush too much. So let's say that we are at this phase, we have completed the SUM run, which means that the source system is now also 2023. And that is one thing you need to keep in mind. We are now actively changing the versioning also on the source side. So for the kind of rollback and recovery strategies, this would mean that potentially we have to roll back to a full backup of the system to its 2020 state. Once the SUM run has been complete, so there's no more changes to be done on the database, we then just finalize the replication, which also will move any delta over from the tenant copy. And we then can use the temporary system connected to this database, the target database, to do any final validation. So we will run, as you will see in the demo, another instance of, for example, the guided transition checks, which is this ABAP report on the queue state and things that are relevant for ECS. Then, as we said, the beginning of the handover process is the switch of the application servers. So we bring the temporary system down and we start up the target system. And as you will see, this is now a native functionality into the Transition Workbench, so you don't need to open any service request or anything like that about it. Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a short look on a demo, how this will look like. One disclaimer, this demo is slightly outdated, so I will point out a few things which are now different as we go. So we come from the same family as SWPM and SUM, so we start with this kind of a catalog view, and here you can see the update and copy to private cloud. One important note is that what is now here in addition available, or will soon be available as an option, is the uninstallation of the temporary system. So as we said, since we introduced this temporary application server, we've tried to take over the operations. So we will install it, and in the future, you can also clean it up with the Transition Workbench. But you select your approach and you start it. We always start with the creation of a key password. This is locally stored into the migration server. Please don't lose the password. If you lose the password, you will lose the vault. And then for each of the migrations, you always have the option to start from an existing vault or create a new one. And especially in the cases where you have multiple runs over the same system, it makes a lot of sense to use an already existing vault. Then we have the kind of cockpit overview. We will always have a separation between an uptime and a downtime phase, and then the activities which are of relevance there. In the uptime phase, we have here the prerequisite checks, and this is the 3 layers of validation which we will do. As step 2, we'll do the software download. So we will download all the required files, including the corresponding SUM, SWPM, ABAP system files, kernel files, and so on. As part of the preparation, we will do here the installation of the temporary system. And as the alternative task, we will do the replication directly from source to target. Then step 4 is the prompt to run SUM and start it on the source system to perform the actual SUM upgrade. And after that is done, you, so to say, come back to the transition workbench where we have the downtime phases. We have the finalization of the replication, some post-processing activities, and finally the switchback. But today we just go one by one through all of the activities. We start with the prerequisite checks. So as we said, we start with the input collection. Here I'm already using an existing vault, so everything is pre-filled. But if this was not the case, for example, you will now be guided through this menu to ask about the host names, domain names, users and passwords. And for all of these, there will be a validation. So we will try to reach into this domain. We will also try to authenticate with this user and password, make sure you have all the credentials. Similarly, at the end, we have a few parameters which are with relation to the configuration of the database and especially the tenant copy settings. So one setting is here for the encryption mode, and the other is just parameters for tweaking a little bit the replication itself. So this is very system specific, what the buffer size should be for the log shipping, and this is something which you can correct here. Now, just to show you in the demo what our behavior is, we will try to decrypt the database shortly for this demo, and then we will revert it. So this is how the input screen looks. It's just a check mark, and behind it is the entire reconfiguration. Important note, this is now fully supported. So we have the support for all scale-out flavors on the screen. You will be prompted to say, okay, this is your system setup. For example, it's a scale-out to scale-up scenario, and this is fully supported. So we correctly have identified the number of nodes. You can check already before moving forward. Now, this is the behavior when we have activities which we have not yet automated or could not automate. One example is the direct connectivity from source to target. So as you saw, we sit in the middle and we still ask you to validate that indeed the source and target can talk to each other, especially on the ports which are required. So in this case, for example, we'll calculate automatically for you the offset ports, but we ask you to manually check that indeed this is the case. Now, this is how we displayed everything which is related to the HANA parameters. So we have the set of minimum requirement parameters for the replication to be configured with the addition of these choices, for example, with the log shipping and the encryption mode. Here you can see we display the exact SQL statements which we would like to execute in order to correct those parameters, and those are split into 2 groups. So the top parameter field or group is parameters which can be updated online and will require no database restart, versus the bottom ones are the one that will require system restart. Now, since this could be a productive source system, of course, we will not take any measures to actually do this into a downtime mode. There is basically 2 layers of verification. So first here, you confirm that you are okay with us executing those statements and reconfiguring the parameters. And after that, we notice, okay, there is a parameter which actually requires a database restart. So we pause the procedure, we wait for you to perform that restart. And once you are done, you can come back here and we continue. So in this case, we don't want to do this, so we simply cancel this and we will restart the task and change the parameters. And you can always restart any of the tasks even after you're done. So for example, you can run another instance of the prerequisite checks even before shortly downtime. So here we just reconfigure. You can see we are now reverting the parameters to how they were. And because this was never applied, this is, so to say, enough. We move into the first report, which is the technical pre-checks. And as you can see, we are now looking at the HANA pre-checks. This has in the meantime also grown. So what we have here is the kind of backup requirements. This has been relaxed. So we had a very strict requirement that there was a last database backup in the last 24 hours. This is now being increased into 7 days, and we are also monitoring for incremental backups. You can see we're looking at the keystroke configuration, the comparison between the source and target plugins. Of course, if there is a mismatch, you might require a service request to ECS, so this could take some time to correct. There is also a check about the HADR. Very importantly, this is only on the target side. So there is no issue with already having high availability DR setup on the source side. This is usually the case for customers. What would be the issue is if that is already set up on the target. And the cases in which this could happen is if you, for example, have a mock run or there is a no-go decision as part of the transition, you might be well enough into the post-processing process that this was already enabled. And you need to notice this in advance, otherwise the subsequent attempt to set up the replication will of course fail. And similarly, as we gather more feedback and experience, we keep expanding these reports to prevent common mistakes. Then we have here the prerequisite checks. Now, because there is a kind of a some update plan, we are not executing the spam STPI check, but otherwise here there is a spam STPI check. In addition, there is now kernel version check, also full clustering checks and so on. So you can look at the full list. This has evolved into the meantime. Important about this is not supposed to be a green O perfect list. So this is part of the prerequisite. So this is just to give you a first look and information on what is of interest to the post-processing procedure and what is of interest to ECS. So you have here the logs and you have the instructions per each check. And in case there are some objects or something wrong with them, you will have here just the warning status. And with this warning status, you can always move on and continue with the migration. The only thing which will block you, of course, is the SIG check. But in this case, you have bigger issues into the migration itself. So with that in mind, keep it kind of open that this is something which is there to now help you discuss with ECS. Why are you interested in these and these activities? And also discuss with the customer what needs to be corrected. Okay, and with that, this is the prerequisite checks done, and this will be the end of that activity. So we move into the download task. For the download task, we require a valid S-user and password and a maintenance planner transaction. Now, the maintenance planner transaction we use also to understand the type of ABAP system. So if you have planned for a BW system, then we understand, okay, this is a update and copy or a lift and shift of a BW system. Therefore, we need to set up the matching application server, and we use this plan also for the kind of download basket to download all those required files. This happens automatically. You are allowed to use the ECS proxy if you're doing the System Transition Workbench. So for the kind of network setup and internet availability, you can discuss with ECS about setting up the proxy from their side. Then in the preparation and replication, there is two activities, as we said, which can be executed in parallel. One is the preparation task where we will install the temporary system, and the other is the task where we will set up the replication. So at this stage, there is not too much to do. As you can see, we have all the parameters already corrected. We have the software stack already downloaded. So you just click on next and we will orchestrate SWPM, set up the system. Same story for the replication. We have checked everything. The HANA has been already configured. So here you just click on next and we start setting up the replication, or we initialize the replication. Now, this is kind of important to note because the prerequisite check as a task will take much longer comparatively as a time than other activities because of just the nature of how things are. So we spend a lot of time preparing things and validating in order for the execution run to go very fast and smooth. Now, the moment the replication becomes active, here on the top, you will see a replication status. This is similar to the HANA Studio status. So we continuously poll the HANA replication and tell you how it's going, especially in the case of update and copy, where you have now a full run while the replication is running. This is also useful to keep an eye on the replication. Of course, you can monitor this in addition with the HANA Studio. Once this is done, we give you here the last log position and the ship log position to compare that everything is correct. And here, when you complete the task, of course, the replication still stays fully active. Then this is a demo system, therefore the replication was much faster than the installation. Usually it's the other way around. Here you can see we have set up this temporary system and there is nothing for you to worry about. Then we go into the preparation for the Zoom run. So we have, as part of the download basket, which you specify where is going to be downloaded also a software update manager. And this you can directly take, transport to the source side and just perform the upgrade. Now here I can also, for the sake of time, skip ahead. One important thing, as part of the uptime activities, we ask you to open a service request, which is called install transition workbench on the managed system. This will install a shadow instance of us onto the target, and we will use this shadow instance to basically orchestrate the switch of the application server. So there is two instances of us, one on the migration server, one on the target. They talk to each other to perform the switch back. We ask you to open this into the uptimes to save, of course, time in the downtime. The idea is not to open service requests into the downtime. And as soon as you are now into this activity, next to the replication status, now there is a new status bar, which is checking that the instance of us is there and is available on the target. So you can always monitor this. By the point you reach the switchback, the two instances are there and you can run them. All right, but we will see the switchback in a second. So we run here the software update manager. It's a standard update run in this case, but as we said, you can here do something like NCTM or ZDO with a little bit more caution, and with that we can further reduce the overall downtime. Once you are done with the Zoom run, you can come back into our UI, and we are now going to the finalize activities. So similar story, we have all the inputs already connected. We check again the replication status, that everything is okay and up to date. Here, in case the system has not been isolated, this is the kind of minimum requirement for isolation. We check again that the replication is started, and then when you click on next, we will trigger the finalize. Here we give you a kind of status that has elapsed. This is similar to the setting up of the replication. And then once the replication is done, you get a first look into the health of it. What do we mean with the health of it? So the HANA tenant copy is very resilient, as you know. Even in network issues, it could have some gaps, it could recover from itself. Also, something might have happened that at some point something is not correctly replicating or is. So we give you a first count check on the different entities to start judging if everything was indeed correct and the replication went smoothly. Important, this is not equivalent to GTV. which is a different session by Abia, where we talk about the data consistency and the actual data is matching and we have correctness of the system. This is just a count check. What you can see is, for example, into the record counts, now we have a mismatch. So there is fewer records on the target than there are on the source. This happened because we intentionally did not fully isolate the source system and it was left fully up and running. And during that time, some logs were being generated. So for that purposes, as you can see here, you can see in the differences and in the details exactly which tables there are. So in case here there would be a customer table or a data table, you might even want to reinstate the replication for that specific table. The goal being that you very quickly have a judgment of the data and how much of the replication happened successfully. And this doesn't eat up into your downtime, or you only find out in the business validation. Again, this is not a report which is intended to be fully green. There is many reasons why here there will be a mismatch. You can have a fully mock run during which the predictive system was never brought down. So of course, a lot of data will be generated. You can have, of course, differences into the views for many reasons or any of the other entities. So here, this is more for your information as a report. It would not block you from proceeding. So you confirm that you have seen the results and you can move on. And as with many things, you can rerun it as many times as you need. Then we perform the refresh database content. Here we use the temporary application server connected to the target database. This will also set up a temporary license for the system. And after this, basically, we are done with the analysis task. Then we move into post-processing. Post-processing is a task which also has a few manual activities. If you are familiar with the kind of run books and so on, there are a few optional things which we have added here that might be of relevance or not, and are currently not automated. Then we run another instance of the guided transition checks, this time against the intermediate system. So if the source system ones were well in advance into the preparation phase of the migration, we are now very short before handing over the system. So usually if there is something to finally correct and check, now would be the time. Or at least, start documenting which things have to be negotiated or discussed with ACS. We take a restart of the intermediate system. This is just the application server, not the database, very importantly. Here we are again reminding that we are requiring this System Transition Workbench and Managed System service request. As I said, with the current version, there is already here a little display, which is giving you again the green check mark or the warning sign whether or not we can reach that instance. But if everything is correct, you just proceed here with the switchback procedure. Now for the switchback procedure, you simply start that. We again have all the inputs once you're done. So we will perform the instance switch. Sorry, I have skipped a little bit. So what we do here is we do the validation of it, and then we start bringing down the intermediate system. We will then establish connectivity to this instance of us on the target. Here we can give you the success mark. And after that, once you click on next, we start bringing up the target. And with that, so to say, the switch is performed. Now, in the past, there used to be a different service request that would do this as part of the downtime activity and would do a similar thing. The issue with that one was, for example, you would use the schema password because that would be reset. Now, with this functionality, you're not losing any access. You have a little bit more control over the entire process. So you will see how things are going. In case of an issue, you will see where the issue is. Is it on the intermediate system side? Is it on the target side? So you have a lot more control of the process. Now, in case everything goes smoothly, the switchback from this side is a rather fast operation, usually taking around the 10-minute mark. Now, once that is done, we do our final run of the guided transition checks, and this one is now even more extensive. So this is the full list as of November. Now it's with even more checks, which now will contain a few additional checks for the targets itself. For example, we here have a check of the security files, that those have been transported. Same with the profile files. Here you can see in the case of a warning, we see that there is some old profiles, so we ask you to clean them up. And with the checks, it's the same behavior. So there is instruction where to go, what transaction to do, what is the context of this check, what are we validating. And as I said, none of these things are blocking. So we usually have this kind of a warning sign. And if you just confirm here, you can move on with the procedure. Now, what is new, which is not here seen, there is a button here which allows you to download this report and attach it as part of your handover documentation. So instead of going into the individual transactions to screenshot them and explain the status of the queue, you can use this report and pass it as the handover. And then, as you can imagine, if we already have all of this information about the status of the system and the status of the queues, we already have all the credentials that are stored into the vault. What is the natural next step is that we support you into fully automatically transferring all of those artifacts to the ECS colleagues. So this would then make the entire handover process much faster and smoother. For the moment, of course, you still have to go through the manual procedure with the Excel handover, but this would also be here the end of the run from the transition workbench side. So once the switchback and the guided transition checks are done, and this also would complete the cockpit. Now, if you want to do another system execution, you would be basically starting a new cockpit. As we said, there is now an option to clean up this temporary application server, so you can uninstall that and then start freshly from the beginning with the cockpit. There is a feedback form at the end. Feel free to use it. So we are monitoring those and regularly checking on the feedback which we received there. Or of course, you can pass feedback on the tool or anything you're missing as functionality via your ECS teams and project teams. They will reach back to us and we can share that with you. Okay, and with that, that is sort of the end of the presentation and the demo. I hope this was useful for you. Basically, this is the kind of high-level view on what the transition workbench is and what it can help for you into these cases. If you have more feedback or more questions, feel free to reach out also directly to me. And with that, I think we are done with the presentation.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us. So I have only one question. I'm unfortunately not technically qualified enough to have any insightful questions. But just one question, which is, out of everything that you've shared, if there is one thing that you want the audience to take action if they are in the process of the transition, what would that be? And maybe another question is there something in the workbench that you think is extremely useful but don't see a lot of customers using? So maybe those two questions, if you can answer.
I think those are very good questions, actually. Those are the perfect questions. Thanks so much. Yeah, so the one thing I would kind of do as a call for action is please use it. Please give it a try. Check on the functionality there. As we said, we are working very actively on this. So it's improving by the month. As you can see, also my demo gets outdated very quickly. And I cannot keep it in, so to say, with it. But please give it a try. Please look into the functionality, look into the pre-checks, look into the automation which is available. Take the things which help your project. There is a lot of value into these guided transition checks, and we really see that in the cases where they use, the entire project is easier, also in the handover and post-processing. So it helps a lot to have already this understanding of what ECS will ask of you. And it helps us a lot if you use it and provide us with the feedback, because in the end, this is a free offering that is here for the kind of partner community to help us all, scale with the volume, because the amount of systems coming right now is not going down. And there is a lot of customers that are on this journey, and there is a lot, of course, we can improve. So the more you use it now, the more things we find, the more feedback you prove, the better this entire process gets for everyone. And then for things which are not so used, of course, it's, as I said, for example, there is a lot of variety and a lot of options you can do with the transition workbench. You can always pick up the latest version. I know this currently is a little bit painful as a process because it's ECS managed. So you have to open a service request to get the latest version, and this might take sometimes even a week. And I know it is a painful thing, but then my request would be, please plan it in the project, because there really is a big difference between one version and the other. And we have a new version every month. So there is a release note which you can check on what's the latest, greatest, but just invest the time in the beginning of the project to update us. We are working very hard to make this process better. For now, it's more of I know it is a struggle, but please try to always get the latest version and provide us with feedback. I would say that would be the best.
Maybe another follow-up question. I know that at Sapphire earlier this year, SAP did announce, I think, 6 or 7 AI agents or assistants, which help in the migration from on-premise to both private or public cloud. So, how does that come into picture with the tool that you showed about? And are there any AI functionalities that the tool enables as well?
Yeah, so there is a few things where the things converge. So a lot of the AI agents which we announced on Sapphire have to do with the preparation of the approaches. They have to do with like the functional layer of the conversion. So they help you with the entire procedure. What we do with the transition workbench then is the technical migration. So you still would have all the preparation, simplification items, custom code, cleanup of the system as part of it. So in the end, it's kind of the same coherent story. Now, for the agents into the transition workbench at Sapphire, we also announced that there is another collaboration where we're trying to make, together with AWS, kind of agent-led migrations together with the transition workbench. And the main thing is that they in order to, because a transition project is a very sensitive topic, right? Customers really rely on the correctness and auditability and what has happened. There we have a collaboration between the AI agents and the automation transition workbench. So we will keep a layer in the transition workbench, which will stay there fully automated, that can prove what has happened and that can be used as the kind of a checkpoint for any agents which we do. And then we try to enhance it with additional functionality on top to speed up things or see where the AI can help you with it. And hopefully there is more to share now. We only announced kind of the initiative that is currently ongoing. But it's, of course, a clear plan of us that if there is something AI can support us into the transition story, that we work together with the transition workbench.
Maybe last question before we kind of end the session, which is, can you share any story in terms of a partner or a customer using this transition workbench and the impact that it has had on their overall project, either in terms of time or effort or cost?
Yeah, sure. So we've had several customers which have had very good feedback and experiences with us. As I mentioned, we had one customer where they have to switch very quickly from Zoom DMO to an update and copy because of the downtime. There we had like a 8 to 10 hour downtime. And the good thing for that project was they only had 3 systems. So they already had migrated the development with the Zoom DMO approach, and they had to do the switch for quality. And because we had all the checks and the automation, this somehow worked out pretty well. So there wasn't this knowledge gap. They were very confident in just performing this approach for the first time on the quality system, and then they were successful with the production. And the good thing there also was we got again the same feedback that in the 1 year that they fixed a lot of the questions that they had and potential issues, everything was then repeatable. So by the time we went to production, there was no issues. Similarly, in cases where we are able to correct everything, like with the guided transition checks and the pre-reports, we have seen customers that would get then 4 to 6 hours into their post-processing. Of course, this is highly dependent on multiple factors, but there you really see how we really have limited everything that could go wrong. And we are now into the stage where if everything else is perfect, things just go very quickly and you can get very fast post-processing times.
Super cool. Thank you so much. Karen, Gina, do you have any questions or do you want to reiterate something that Christine has shared today?
Yeah, thank you, Mukesh. Yeah, I don't have a question, but I would like to emphasize the message of Christine. I think for all the customers and partners, this workbench provides really security for all involved parties, for the customers, for the partners, and as well for us at SAP. And thanks to the existing gateways and the guided process, risks are minimized and time is saved. So I would like to emphasize this is really good for the budget. Yeah. And so please feel free to familiarize yourself with it and get in touch if you have any questions. And thank you, Christine. Thank you very much to be part of our story in the Business Transformation Center with this really valuable tool and method. So yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So with that, sorry, you're saying something?
I said, thanks so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to share this message. I hope it is of use to the community.
Yeah, so I think that kind of concludes the episode for today. Thank you so much, Christine, for sharing the expertise, and thank you so much, Karen and Gina, for helping us put together this entire program. So until we see you again next week, in the next session, this is Mukesh Gupta signing off. Thank you so much.